Welcome to the Mathematics Professional Development Series, sponsored by the Making Math Matter grant, in cooperation with partners of the Blue Springs School District, Wellington-Napolean School District, Center School District, and Hickman Mill School District, with a big thank you to KCPT. With me today is Tristan Lehman. Tristan, thank you so much for being a part of our show today.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I've worked with you now for the past 5 years, and I've seen you go from a normal classroom teacher that just does everything the right way to a mentor teacher to now taking an instructional coach role in your district being math. Tell me about the transition. Where were you almost 10 years ago as a starting teacher to where you are now? How have things changed?
I would say this grant has completely changed me as a teacher. Being a first-year teacher, I kind of just did what everybody else did in the building, and what really even my student teaching was about. You stood up in the front of the classroom, you introduced what we were doing, you showed them a couple ways to do it, had the class do some problems together, and then they did some on their own as a homework assignment. Now I've learned that kids don't learn the best that way. They need time to explore and to solve and figure out the problems for themselves, and then you kind of come in at the end as the teacher and to check for their understanding and make sure that it is correct.
You know, I think it was amazing how I watched your 5th grade class, but you also teach 6th grade as well, correct?
Yes.
That's amazing to me because I think that 5th to 6th transition of elementary to middle school is huge. Now, you're from the Wellington-Napolean School District. Give me a little bit of background about small town USA. Wellington
is very small. It's K-12 all in one building. There's about 400 total students, K-12. In the elementary, we have around 200, and I have 11 in my 5th grade classroom, and then 16 in my 6th grade classroom. So it's very small. Kids get to know each other really well, which I think is a real benefit because they're all comfortable with each other. They can all work together. I can put them into groups, and I can change partners anytime I want to, and they're going to be able to work with that person because they know who they are. They've grown up with them their whole lives.
Wow. Tell me about, let's talk about today's lesson. Give me the setup. What kind of pre-teaching did you have to do for today's part?
Well, we were using manipulatives a lot. So we take a few days towards the beginning of school to just talk about all the different manipulatives that I have in my room, because I have a lot of them that have gotten through the grant and at various avenues. But we talk about how to use each one and when we might use it, how to use it. So today, for this lesson, they actually had a choice of 4 or 5 different manipulatives, and they could then choose which one they were most comfortable with for the problem.
What was the goal of today's lesson?
We were actually multiplying fractions. I didn't ever tell them that to start the lesson with. I simply gave them a problem that had a set fraction in it, and then they had to find a fraction of the fraction. So I believe it was they had to find 3/4 of 4/5. It was a recipe for making breakfast. So they had to model 4/5 with whatever manipulative they chose, and then find a way to show 3/4 of that.
You know, I'm going to use a little bit of your 6th grade experience now. If you're talking about fractions in 5th grade, where do you go forward with that? Or another question I could ask, how important are fractions to your 5th graders as they move to 6th grade?
It's huge. Fractions are everywhere, 5th grade and 6th grade. I think my job as a 5th grade teacher is to make sure that they have a really good understanding of fractions, having that number sense that's involved with them. So that way in 6th grade, when we start doing some more complex operations, they have that basic understanding down, and now it's just learning the new concepts.
You know, obviously you're multiplying fractions today. What about the next day? What about a week from now? Where do you want to go with this?
Well, the next step would be using what we've learned about multiplying and look at division of fractions. They're opposite functions, opposite operations, so they can use a lot of the same tools and manipulatives to figure out how to divide. And then ultimately, once we get into 6th grade, we're setting up ratios and proportions which look very similar. And we can use all the same tools there again as well.
You know, I know you said you could use a whole variety of tools and manipulatives. What do the kids tend to gravitate towards?
Students will use their dry erase boards almost every single day. It gives them a good chance to sketch out their thinking and share with their peers. As far as for fractions, we have number tiles, we have fraction tiles fraction blocks. They'll use the ones that we got from the math grant that actually have the fraction, the decimal, and the percent on there. So we get to talk about all three of those things at once. And then eventually they'll tend to lean more towards like Cuisinart rods, because they're more of an abstract tool to use, and we can give them lots of different meanings. Instead of picking up one piece that says 1/2, now this one piece could mean anything that we want it to mean.
Well, let's kind of focus on you for a second. Being the expert in the classroom, are you really comfortable and are you efficient with using a lot of these tools? Where were you at 10 years ago versus now?
10 years ago, I didn't even know what most of the manipulatives were. Through the math grant, Greg Tang came in one day and he pulled out Cuisinart rods and started showing us all these wonderful things we could do with them. And I was thinking to myself, I have a whole bunch of these in my closet at school, never touched them once because I didn't even know what they were. I'm like, how in the world can I use these things? Well, then Greg showed us, and now we use them pretty much every time we talk about fractions.
So again, looking at all the tools you use and all the kids' proficiency level with these tools, do you think the manipulatives really make the difference in your classroom?
I think they make a huge difference. It gives kids a chance to explore hands-on. They can actually see the problem develop right in front of them instead of just trying to do an algorithm or just try to do the mathematics involved. They can physically manipulate things on their desk that gives them the answer. And then once we talk about the equation and the math involved later, it makes sense to them. They're like, oh yeah, that's what we just did with the blocks or with the tiles, and it all makes sense.
Talk to me about the structure, how they set things up. I mean, the kids knew every single aspect of what to do, where to do it, and how to do it. Is this something that you set up early in the year, or how did you set this up?
So early on in the year, we set up groups in my math class, and every math class has their own groups. Every kid in the group has a specific job that they have to do. There's a captain, a facilitator, a resource manager, a recorder, and a reporter. So the captain and the facilitator, their main job is to make sure that everybody is on task and is focused. They ask a lot of questions within their group, and their main job is to make sure that everybody within the group understands the math that is taking place. They understand the concept, they've understood how to work it out, how to get the right answer. We have the resource manager. Obviously their whole job is to get all the resources, manipulatives, whatever that's required for the problem that we're doing in class that day. They are the ones that can also come and ask me questions for the group. And then we have a recorder and the reporter. So the recorder will write down all of the thoughts. So any thought that comes from any student in their group, they're in charge of writing all those ideas down on their dry erase board. And then the reporter will actually report. They will tell me all of the different ideas that their group had, and then they share the answer that their group came up with and explain and justify why they got that answer.
Again, it's no doubt in my mind why you're one of the math leaders in your building. What are your final thoughts?
I really just am thankful that I got involved with this math grant. It's a huge thanks to Blue Springs School District for allowing a small school like Wellington to be a part of it and giving us opportunities that we normally wouldn't have in a different situation.
Let's jump into Mr. Lehman's classroom.
Today's lesson. First off, we're going to talk about the day of school. Today is the 44th day of school. So on your boards and in your groups, talk about what 44 means. What do you think about? What does it mean? What is it made of? What are its factors, multiples, and how is it significant to your everyday life?
And then 40 and 4. You can also make it by taking 4 times 11.
4 times 11.
From how old your dad is? 3 years away from how old your dad is.
Yeah.
All right. So Andrew, what did you say? How is it significant to you?
Oh, my dad's 44.
Dad's 44 years old. Kaylin, what do you think?
4 times 11 equals 44.
So she said 4 times 11 is 44. Kaylin?
These are called multiples, right?
I don't know, are they?
Well, I think so, because 30 and 14 and 20 and 24.
So you're putting two numbers together to make 44. Are those multiples?
No, they'd be.
What do you think?
Wouldn't they be, what's it made of?
What's it made of? What do we call that? You remember?
Factors. right?
What?
Aren't they called factors?
30 and 14. Does anybody remember what we call those? Remember we usually put little circles around them like that?
A multiple?
Not multiple. Number bonds?
Yeah.
No? Oh, yeah, there it is. Number bonds. So 30 and 14 would be a number bond of 44. So are these all number bonds of 44? The 30, 14, 40 and 4, 20, 24, 43 and 1? So how do we know what number bonds to use? So if we were dividing by 3, we might use 30 and 14. But if we were dividing by 4, we might use 40 and 4. So it really just depends on the problem that we're looking at, what number bond we want to use. Okay, how about the factors? We talked about a couple already. We said 1 and 44. What would be the next group of factors? Tucker?
2 and 22.
2 and 22. Does 3 go into it?
No.
How do we know 3 doesn't go into it? Kaylin?
There's nothing times 3 plus 44.
How do you know? Do you just know it? What if you didn't know that? How could you tell? Trey?
Because 4 is not divisible by 3, so that means that 44 would not be divisible by 3.
Let's switch gears just a little bit and talk about multiples. So what would be our first multiple of 44?
1.
Is it 1?
44.
44. Because it's 44 times 1, right? So our first multiple of 44 is 44. What would be our second one? Tucker?
88.
88. How do you know?
Because you plus 44 plus 44.
So 44 plus 44. 44 times 2. Trey, what's next?
132.
How do you know that?
Because if you add 44 to 88, it would give you that. Because
So we can just add 44. What is 44 made of? We said earlier, let's think about place value. How could we use that as a mental strategy? What is 44 made up with, or made up of as place value?
4 tens and 4 ones.
4 tens and 4 ones. I'm giving you a question now to solve. What fraction of the total number of eggs did Mr. Mefford use to make the waffles? Find your fifths. Show me that you have 4 1/5 pieces. And then I'll come around and look and see if you can show me 3 out of those 4. Okay, well this is your 4/5 here. So if we're going to use 3/4 of those eggs, then that one needs to be 3/4.
I used 3/4 and 4/5.
Okay.
I did it so like he has all 4/5, and then he took these 4 out, and then this is what he left in the fridge. And then
So you said fifths, right?
yeah,
What are these?
tenths, but
How can you do that?
because 10 can be divided by 5, and I also looked at Tucker's and mine, and they're exactly the same height.
Not equal that.
So you put 2 of these together to equal 1 of those.
Yeah. And then it said that he used 3/4 of it. So for waffles, so this is the 3/4 of it, and this is the extra, and this is what he left in the fridge.
Most of us, as I walked around the room, depending on which manipulative that you used, had your 5/5. You said, I know that there was 5 equal groups in the fridge. Okay? He took out 4 of those groups, which left me 4/5. And then it says, out of those groups, so out of the 4/5 that he had, he used 3/4, or 3 out of the 4. So we can just take 3 out of the 4, and that's my answer. That's what he used to make waffles. So what is that called? What would our answer be here? Tucker?
3/5.
How do you know it's 3/5?
Because you have 3 of the fifths, so you would add the 3 ones.
So, and these are called fifths, so it's 3 1/5 pieces.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do we know they're fifths and not fourths? What did we originally call each of these pieces? Whether they're labeled or not, what did we call them, Kaylin?
1/5 because there are 5 of them.
Yeah, we called them all fifths to begin with. When we first drew our bar model, we broke it into 5 equal pieces. So when we did that, every piece is now a fifth. So for the equation, what would we actually be doing? We're finding 3/4 of the 4/5. So how would I write that? 3/4 of 4/5. Kaylin?
3/4 times 4/5 equals question mark.
So is there a different way to do that?
Yeah, you could do this.
Cross
3/4.
cancel.
You could
Cross
do
cancel.
1, and then you would get 3/5.
And then we get the 3/5 that we had originally.
You can just
Okay.
you divide that so it equals 3 5.
How did you know to use 4?
Because 4 is a factor, 5 and 4 are a factor of 20, so you could use 4 to get 5.
Okay.
And 4 and 3 are, you can times that to make 12, and then you could just take the 12, divide by 4, and you get 3.
So you're saying 4 is a factor of both 12 and 20.
Yeah,
Okay, so we found a common factor.
yeah.
I've seen a few things. Brylan here, she said, well, I know you can just multiply straight across. Take your 3 times 4 and get 12. And then your 4 times 5 and get 20. Does that look similar to an answer we had earlier? I believe Andrew, Tanner, and Keegan all got 12/20ths as their original answer. But we got 3/5. So then how do we turn that 12/20ths into 3/5? Emily?
So once you get that, you're going to take 12/20ths by 4/4. Because last year we learned if you divide something by the bottom, you have to divide it the same number by the top. And if you do it by the top, you have to do the same number by the bottom.
Okay, she says,
It has to be even.
okay, divide by 4, and we get 3/5. How did we know 4? Why did we use 4? Kaylin?
Because 3 times 4 equals 12, and then 5 times 4 equals 20.
Okay, so 4 is a common factor of 12 and 20. We need a statement that answers the question, what fraction of the total number of eggs did Mr. Mefford use to make waffles?
He used 3/5 of his eggs for waffles.
He used 3/5 of the eggs to make waffles. Is that a good statement? What do you think? Is that a good statement? He used 3/5 of the eggs to make waffles?
Yep.
Walked around, most of us are saying the same thing. I like that we're using his name in the statement. I think if we know specific information, we should put that in. I don't like just saying he used. Well, who's he? Mr. Mefford. So, Jared, read what statement your group came up with.
Mr. Mefford used 3/5 to make his waffles
3/5 what?
of the eggs.
So Mr. Mefford used 3/5 of the egg to make waffles. Could we have left it 12/20ths?
Yeah.
Would that have been okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so 12/20ths is technically a correct answer, right? But what do we know about the world we live in today? Emily?
Like if you walk into a pizza store and say, I want 12/20ths of a pizza, you might get kicked out.
They're going to look at you pretty weird, aren't they? 12/20ths of what? Yeah.
Of a pizza.
Yeah, they're not going to know what that means. They might be more understanding of 3/5. I want you to really reflect back on what we've done today, what we've talked about today. So these are 3 questions you can think about as you're writing your reflection. What have I learned? When might I need this in my everyday life? We just talked about making breakfast. And how could I take this a step further? So we took it a step further by throwing in the eggs, right? So how could I take that a step further? That's a little bit of the challenge piece.
Let's look at this from the eyes of his students.
In math today, we learned how to multiply fractions.
I felt good about the teaching today because I think we learn more when we have to figure it out for ourselves, not a teacher just standing there telling us how to do it.
I made an example on my whiteboard with the equation, the statement, and a bar model. And then on my, with my fraction tool, well, the fraction bar, I showed 4/5 and 3/5.
I think having different methods helps me in math because if I don't like one method, I can always try another method.
I learned in math that fractions can be very hard, but if you break them down, they can also be very easy.
Thank you guys for watching today's Mathematics Professional Development Series featuring Tristan Lehman from the Wellington-Napolean School District. Thank you again to the Making Math Matter grant in cooperation with the Blue Springs School District, Wellington-Napolean School District, Hickman Mills School District, and Center School District, and KCPT. Thanks again for watching.